Hello and welcome to the sidelines of Pondy Fest 2023. I finally have Shiv with me, a journalist I respect for his editorial choices, to bring to the audience as much as possible the other aspect of media, that is how to read media through the lines that we read and through the voices that we hear. So this is not about politics, this is not about the news, this is more about journalism. So, Shiv, thank you so much finally for accepting to do this. And I'll start with the very first question that always bothers me. And that is, in fact, I saw Elie Wiesel once talk about the Holocaust. And he abhorred neutrality. And this is what he had to say about neutrality. So, we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere when human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. So I think when you look at the news, the way it is done in our country today, a lot of neutrality is passed off as unbiased, which I think is dangerous. So can you give us examples as to where you feel you draw the line and you should not be neutral and what you define as bias?
I completely agree with the quote that you just read out. I think neutrality is poison. Neutrality is cowardice. It's the refusal to take a stand when a stand must be taken. There are more than enough examples, and I will give some over where I believe that neutrality is not just a cop out, but also an act of aiding the tormentor, as this quote goes. What does neutrality mean when you're on a burning train, as the famous saying goes as well. But what I will say as a journalist is, and as I always do, I only speak from my example and nobody else's. There is a very, very big difference between neutrality and objectivity. The difference between neutrality and objectivity is that in neutrality, you just refuse to take a stand no matter what the circumstances and say, okay, I'm not going to say anything about either side, and I'm neutral and I'm awesome, and see how fair I am. Objectivity is most definitely taking a stand, but it is a stand that is defined solely by the situation at hand, not by who the tormentor or tormentee are, not since we're talking about India, not which political party or which ecosystem they belong to, not about the legacy issues that may be applicable in the said situation. Take for instance the very relevant subject of rape. I did a video recently on my show, which did very well because I think most people connected with it, about how the politics and reporting of rape has become a my rape versus your rape kind of situation. Now, rape is rape, is a crime in India and around the world. And how can anyone be neutral about rape? You have to be objective about it. If a BJP MP has been accused of rape, you call it out. If a Congress MP has been accused of rape, you call it out. Or from any other party. I'm just taking these examples. So there's no such thing as neutrality in my view. And anyone who claims to be neutral is both a coward and someone who obviously has no convictions as far as the subject matter at hand is concerned, and is most likely someone who is partisan political party wise. So my example is that you take each situation on its own merits. You take them on what is happening in front of you. If that means that the stand that you take is against one side or the other, when it is entirely the opposite in a different set of circumstances, that is what objectivity is. That is what being fair actually is. There's an ugly phrase called monkey balancing, which I and many other journalists are often accused of. The reason why the word monkey balancing is more a reflection on the people who use the phrase than on people like me, is that it basically tells me that these people do not understand objectivity, because for them, taking a strong stand enforced by your political party allegiances is the world you come from. And you do not understand objectivity because it is unfamiliar and alien to you, because it makes you uncomfortable, because there's a truth that comes in monkey balancing, if you want to call it that, but that's objectivity.
That's true. Now, to the bare definition of journalism, I think the most classic thing would be that you bring news to the people, you inform us about what's happening. So one would normally think that the job of the journalist would be to bring to you the story. So I find myself sometimes getting irritated when opinion is laced with news. But again, there are times when I feel that just the news bare is not doing justice. In fact, that creates a bias. You need the opinion of the journalist to actually nuance what's happening for us to understand it better. So, how do you what is your philosophy of dosage of opinion giving when you report the
Again, I will take my example and I'll give you my opinion on what I think the landscape looks like. First of all, the days of anodyne news delivery are gone, because I think the world has moved on from news channels, journalists being merely messengers or relayers of what's happening, for good, for better or for worse. Okay, because we live in a world where audiences expect a degree of storytelling, expect a degree of crafting a story in such a way that it is palatable. Now you can have an opinion on that, on how it is, and the merits and demerits of that, but that's the reality of audiences nowadays. They don't want the kind of vanilla Doordarshan style of delivery of news anymore. Now, coming to my example of it, okay, and look, first of all, we tend to criticize journalism and the TV media, and to me, it always has this couched presupposition that the audiences are full of idiots and who know nothing. Audiences are the smartest people around. They know what they're consuming. Why do we make these questions about objectivity, about opinion, while having this subliminal kind of opinion that audiences are these bunch of lambs in a pen and we're just blasting stuff at them, and they do not have the agency to take calls and know what opinion is, and they don't. I know what you're going to say, but let me answer it anyway. Okay, but you make a point about how facts can be laced with editorial. The simple answer to that is audiences look at anchors as not just messengers anymore. That's a reality, and it's not a reality now. It started after the Vietnam War, and it's continued now, where the journalist you watch, the anchor you watch, the reporter you watch, is someone you trust. You trust what they're telling you. You trust what they're bringing to you, and you want to know what they think about it. You actively want to know about it. Like, for example, I remember when I was growing up and I was watching television, I did want to know what journalists thought about a particular story. I didn't want them to just relay the news, which is why if you watch my show now, and once again, I go back to my example because that's the only one I can defend, is that I not only bring people the news, but I give audiences a very no-nonsense, unadulterated dose of my opinion as well. But even my opinion is buttressed with facts. It is rooted in reality and data. I try and support it with a degree of storytelling. Since I function in the visual medium, pictures mean everything to my stories. And if the reception to those little opinion shots, as they are, is any indication, people love them, and that is the only metric I can go with. The feedback I get. I have no inflated sense of self. I believe that I have a place where the public can see me. It's a vastly responsible position where I get to speak my mind in certain ways, and my organization, hats off to them for giving me that space to not just deliver the news, but also give my opinion on my stories, which is a big thing that most people are not allowed to. And the response to it has been, we love it, because Because if you've seen my opinions, Alo, you know that I do not. These are not partisan opinions. They're about contentious issues where I try to take uncomfortable stands. I have an obsession with trying to highlight hypocrisy. I've done it on both sides. I've gotten into trouble on both sides about it. But so be it. That's the nature of storytelling. That's the nature of having the will to be able to take the scalpel to both sides. Now, I know for a fact that there is one section that will always view me as not interrogating the government. There will be another side who will view me as monkey balancing, and you've used that phrase many times. I will always be seen as someone who has a predilection for questioning the opposition. But the fact is, if you look hard enough at all of my work and my entire body of work, you will see that none of this stands to real scrutiny. There have been anything you accuse me of. If you spend enough time on my body of work, you'll find more than enough examples to refute what you're saying. And I mean this for both sides, or all sides, as it were, in this current political landscape. So I think it's important to remember that that opinion editorial is very much part of how journalism is delivered these days. It's a reality. It's not something new. It's not a modern it's not a modern trend or a part of how journalism is, and it's just about how we deal with it.
So to come back to the point about the audience is not stupid, but one thing that you journalists behind the facade, either of print or a television screen, enjoy is that you have a ring of authenticity that we as viewers have attributed to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you must acknowledge the fact that when we look at a particular channel for a breaking story, or we wait for the report or a ground report for a particular story, it is because you belong to that profession and you have a medium by which you express that we have attributed to you a certain authenticity. It is when that attribution is done and then our trust already gained, when we are now subjected to opinion being laced with, I'm not saying that opinion is bad. I'm just, telling you like what is your point where, news cannot just be, like you said, cut and dry. It has to be laced with context also, and context also, you have to have interventions by the journalists. So that was
let's be clear. There is, you said the audiences make the channel or make the anchor, make the reporter.
Like we have
audiences make everything.
Yeah.
The audiences make everything. The audiences are the only things that matter. Let's be very clear. It's not just about that. The only thing, at least in my worldview, I'm not talking about all the other pulls and pressures of modern media, but I'm saying that for me, it is literally the audiences that matter. It's the feedback that I get. As someone who has a far bigger backroom job than the one you actually see for that 1 hour on the daily news, is that you're looking at data, you're looking at metrics, you're looking at viewership and things like that. But at the end of the day, to me, and I speak very personally, the kind of feedback that I get directly from my audiences, and this is a place where social media has been a huge game changer, is more than it matters. It may be anecdotal, it may not be empirical. All of that is a valid justification, but I believe that that's where your true feedback is. So don't for a moment think that I'm dismissing or diminishing the fact that audiences expect a certain quality of journalism. But I will reiterate once again that I don't think opinion is a bad thing. There are, of course, examples of either channels or shows or anchors or journalists where opinion is the dominant ingredient of what they present, and not to diminish that either, because those things have their own viewership, and I am not going to sit here and judge audiences for what they provide that viewership to. I'm not going to sit here, just as people judge journalists for what they do, I'm not going to say, but the audiences love it and therefore we have to give it to them. That's one way of looking at it. But also remember that, why not? Audiences want opinion. Audiences want to know what the people they've invested so much trust in think about contentious issues. Now, whether they agree with it or disagree with it, decide not to watch it, decide to ignore it, decide to boycott it, that's their freedom. We have that freedom in this country. But I'm just saying that opinion can't be looked at as an adulterant of media. I believe that, and just to close that thought, my example of opinion on my show is, I believe I do it, and I'm proud of the way I do it, because I do it constructively. I believe that my opinions are thought through. I believe, like I said, that they're rooted in data, facts, verifiable information. One piece of very valuable feedback I get often is that my opinion pieces are illuminating, because they tell you not just about what I think, but much more about the issue itself. So so they're not just opinion; they're hybrid. It's like me telling a story, illuminating, pointing a spotlight on a story, ensuring viewers know more about something, but also giving them that little dose of my opinion, which hopefully will add some perspective. That's all.
No, that's true. Actually, I wasn't talking specifically
Yeah.
about your take. In fact, I want to come back.
I was
to
just
later.
using it as an example.
Yeah. So now, every human being has bias. So I suppose the journalist is supposed to put that aside the most. And there are various types of biases, but there are two that are little subliminal that I want to highlight, and I want you to give me your opinion on it. And one is that you actually create a biased narrative when you allow your platform to voice what goes by ground reporting or bites from the people concerned, where misinformation gets the platform, but there is no counter by the journalist. So I can give you a CA, I think, was the worst example, where the narrative that this was anti-Muslim or anti-Indian Muslim was allowed to flow. And channel after channel, platform after platform allowed that. And it was completely wrong. So I didn't find too many people holding mics to actually counter that. So you can say that this is the opinion. It's in a way you can justify it by saying this is what the people are saying. That is one type. The other one is when there is a story that is burning and is screaming to be told. But bias is when you choose not to report it. So tell me how you've encountered these.
So let's take
you check yourself from doing
so let's take the first example of CAA, which is a very good example. Everyone remembers how it unfolded. It was it was what I call a story in motion, where a story in motion is not a cop out. It's basically what I define as a story that is developing rapidly in front of your eyes. It's shape shifting. The people involved are saying different things. Even journalists and anchors are making sense not just of the reactions that are coming in, but what CAA itself actually means. There was that period, I think you may be referring to that one period where, for about 10, 12 days where it was absolute chaos and all this misinformation came out. Once again, I will speak for my example, and I'll say two things, and I will not censor myself when I say this. There is a section of the media that revels in the fact that this misinformation fuels a greater degree of acrimony. It fuels a greater degree of political fighting, and that's good for, that's good to keep the proverbial blood up. The energy levels are high when misinformation is flying around and people are getting angry and people are getting perturbed and reacting to each other. That's good for energy levels on air. The bad news, of course, is that sober fact checking, sober context, sober history, looking at documents, myth busting. These are boring things. These are like, why are you being a party pooper? Let them shout, no? So I'm just giving you a kind of very cut and dry view of how things are looked at in certain sections of media. Now, coming to my neck of the woods, specifically India Today, my show, my channel, my organization, and I'll qualify this in a moment, because you might think I'm biased because it's India Today. If you watched India Today's coverage of the CAA, and I was very much in the newsroom at that time, we spent a great deal of time demystifying the CAA laws. We did a great deal of many shows explaining the laws. We did shows which got us into a great deal of trouble with certain parties, where we were talking about how many myths were being perpetrated by each politician. It's all available on YouTube. You can go and see it. So there is always trouble in clubbing the media together. The word media in India itself is problematic, because we are not all the same. We are not all following one certain kind of example. So that's something I reject very strongly. India Today did a fabulous job of contextualizing, myth busting, fact checking, calling out instigators, calling out those who were pretending to be fact checkers, but conveniently not fact checking certain things that were being said, and there are so many examples of that nowadays as well. So I don't think that was the case. You're right when you say that reporters out in the field sometimes don't cross question, but again, anchors and journalists have become soft targets for this kind of thing. I invite anyone to see what it's like being out there in a vitiated atmosphere, trying to get sound bites by angry, powerful people, and then, not immediately in that situation cross-questioning. But if you look at how the channel handled those things, I think we acquitted ourselves very well. On issues that are screaming to be covered when action is not taken, I'm sure the Bengal violence is one of the things that must be on top of your mind right after the elections. Yeah. So, well, again, there was no time when India Today was not covering it. It was covering it. You can argue endlessly about whether it was covered enough. Why wasn't it as big as the coverage of certain other comparable stories, perhaps? And that's I guess that's a debate that one can legitimately have on treatment of a story. And since all of that happened, for the media in general, I think there have been those who completely blanked out the story. I know for a fact that we didn't. I certainly didn't, because it was on my show multiple times in the aftermath of the election. But yeah, there are pulls and pressures for sure. There may have been something bigger to cover. There may have been there are internal wranglings within the BJP that affect coverage. By certain channels, by certain agencies. There may be power centers in Delhi who don't want too much attention on the BJP in Bengal, which is why you then had the BJP in Bengal saying they've been abandoned. There are all these factions within. And make no mistake, all of these things get translated into editorial decisions in certain newsrooms. Not my own, certainly not ours, because like I said, I am one of those gatekeepers in my channel. I do have a certain amount of power in terms of what my channel puts out. So there's no question of that happening at India Today, but these things do happen. There are missives, there are messages. They're like, don't put the entire attention there because it makes the powers that be at the center look bad. That after this they've just written off their people and they're like dying like flies in Bengal, etc. So there are all these pulls and pressures which I imagine may have been part of why this could have happened in certain sections of the media. But for us, those are not considerations. And let me be even more frank with you. And when I say that, it is not like I or my colleagues or my group are not subject to the same pressures that all the rest of the media are subject to. But at the end of the day, it's about the decisions you take. And judge us by our work.
Okay, now, my qualification to your answer, it can't be about you and your show, because your show is the exception that sometimes, very often, is not Delhi-centric. So when I talk about, skewed coverage, is that for the rest of India, especially for us down south, if we look at news coverage, it is astounding the extent to which the regional areas are not covered. So to me, those are, again, you don't bring the answer to you because it does not apply to you. But you must have the objectivity to say
I have an answer to
that is neglected and somehow news is Delhi and Delhi's news.
So let me say that is one of the reasons why I am the head of output of India Today. One of the reasons why. So please look at Shiv beyond just 5 p.m. I know I've taken a lot of examples of 5 p.m., but I am not just the anchor of 5
Live. 5 p.m. is an exception when you focus on South. But I'm not talking about India Today in general either. I'm talking about news in general.
Okay, I'm not.
And one of the biases is that regional does not get.
You can try as much as you want to draw me into speaking about my colleagues in other organizations.
Not colleagues,
but I'll tell you. Okay, it's a serious question. Let me answer it. Let me answer it in as honest a way as I possibly can. The answer to that is this. Look, first of all, please don't look at me as just the anchor of 5 Live. I run my newsroom. I'm the head of output of India Today TV, which means that I am the gatekeeper of what goes on air. I decide what goes on air. I decide when it goes on air. I decide in what form it goes on air. That's my responsibility, which means that you have to judge me by my channel and everything I do on it. So don't for a moment think that, I am confined to the decision making on my show. That's not true at all. So the credit for what goes on my show must also go to the channel, because they see me as someone who has the breadth of vision, hopefully, to bring in neglected parts of the country like the South, where I'm from, and put it on air. That's one of the reasons why you see more coverage of the South on India Today than you see on any other channel. It's a reality. I'm not sitting here doing PR for India Today. It's a reality. You know it. I know it. Now, the channel wants that for the channel, because you have to give credit to India Today for saying, we recognize and see that we need more coverage beyond just the Delhi-centric focus. And that's the reason why Shiv Aroor has been given a certain amount of responsibility to bring that flavor, bring that breadth, bring that depth in different parts of the country. So don't only give me the credit. It's not just 5 Live, it's also the channel.
The viewer should decide that.
And the viewer does decide that. And let me say this again, since this is an interview, that India Today is India's #1 channel. It's the most viewed channel. Okay, in terms of ratings that are insulated from being rigged or fixed, we are still the #1 channel by far. You can look at any metrics you want. Those that can be can be manipulated or fixed or rigged or bought or landed or whatever it is you may want to call it, that's out of my hands. I don't have it. But in metrics that I can see live, whether it is digital, whether it is YouTube, we are by far the most watched channel. We are India's #1 channel.
Okay, granted. I will not dispute those figures. The next point is, especially in the last 10 years, we've been branded by many as a fascist republic. So where press freedom is clamped down upon. And so there are 2-3 aspects to this question. The first question is Western perception of, the indexes, the surveys that call us, put us very, very low, sometimes even lower than very regressive Islamic states in terms of press freedom. So first address this part. I mean, how do you react to this sort of branding?
So I have 2-3 points to make on that. Press freedom indexes are basically bullshit. Okay, even a cursory glance at the kind of lists that they put out are egregiously idiotic. Okay, and one does not need to be a nationalist or a patriot or any of those things to feel sort of hurt or injured by those lists, because they are patently unempirical, and they are completely rooted in other things which are not nothing close to being related to press freedom per se. Now, as far as press freedom is concerned, I want to make one quick qualification. Let's not look at press freedom in a country as big as India, which is basically like a continent, just about the mainstream media, the urban media, the English media, the large Hindi channels. We have an enormous media in this country that is so far away from our field of vision that it is impossible to, it's actually stupid to have an opinion on press freedom based on just, one journalist getting arrested here, one person getting arrested there. We have an entire nation of journalists who work behind the scene in the vernacular press, in the language press, who function under a great deal of pressure and threat in the hinterland, where the rules of the game are far more brutal. There are real consequences of questioning the powers that be, etc., etc. So I just wanted to make that one qualification, that press freedom is not just about the urban, visible media. It's about the entire media. Now, having said that, of course, there are instances of crackdowns on press freedom. Of course, there are instances of journalists being targeted for various things. But to say that India is in this black hole as far as press freedom is concerned is such an incredible over exaggeration. and I will come to what my theories for the reasons are in a moment, that it's actually appalling. It's every time journalists are targeted, we have more than enough voices to hold the targeting of that person, accountable. There are questions that are raised in all sections of the media when it comes to journalists who are targeted with idiotic things like sedition. I have raised my voice about many journalists who've been arrested, whether or not I agree with the things they did or the what they stand for. So as far as press freedom is concerned, at least in our visible field, it's complete bullshit. India has an extremely vibrant, noisy, scrappy, adversarial press. Yes, there can be a huge amount of criticism about sections of the press being subservient and unwilling to interrogate the government, but by and large, I believe, and I wholesomely include the vast vernacular media that we have, because English news media, I mean, and this is something that I say with a great deal of humility, is one tiny molecule of a fraction of what the entire media of this country really is. We are so small; it is beyond humbling. So any English anchor or English journalist who believes he or she is the bee's knees and commands an enormous audience and whatever, well, they need a reality check. But as far as press indexes, and just to close the thought on that, the reason why I think these press indexes come, I think and this is not from a place of insecurity that I say this. I feel that many press index issues, religious freedom reports, other suspiciously unempirical and um, lopsided reports and lists and indexes of this kind are rooted actually in something that's you see a lot more, and that is a degree of alarm and frustration over a changing India. Uh, this is a country that is no longer restrained by its legacy issues. And I'm not even talking about the Modi government. I'm not talking about the Modi. I'm talking about civilizationally, socially, politically, in terms of the media, in terms of the people, in terms of the economy, in all ways, this is a rising country. There's a huge, for the first time in our history, India, India appears to be in a position where its gargantuan problems can be solvable in the next half century. Okay. And these are big things. These are big things to think about. What it basically tells the world is that this is a country where we were fine as long as they were, held down and weighed down by their population and their poor and their problems. And, they were a safe country because they were weighed down by all these things, so we didn't really have to bother. Now they have no choice but to pay attention, because India has enormous goodwill, it has enormous strength and power. It's a market that none of these countries can ignore. It is the singular country that is a bulwark against China in the region. It is a country that is not only increasingly powerful, but its reliability and the solidity of its structures have never been shaken. And I think there is a global ecosystem of countries who feel that the size of their seat at the table, the size of the power they wield in a changing global order, is cannibalized by a rising India. And this may be a large answer to us, one small little
No, it
press
is
freedom
important. It is
index,
important
but I
because
think that's what it's
because
rooted
we
in.
have a large section
And please
of
remember,
our press.
this is what I'm doing is not. I'm not chest beating. This is not. I'm not saying this from
No, it is
from a
factual. I
perspective
have
of
lived the
nationalism.
90s. I know.
But even if you boil it down to small little things like the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations, by the way, is one of the most expensive and useless institutions in the world. It has never achieved anything apart from oversee bits of peace in certain countries, and they do some good work as far as children and water are concerned, but otherwise, by and large, utterly useless and a waste of money. But to come back to the point, to close that point, which is that at the end of the day, a rising India is a threat. It's as simple as that. It means your meal becomes smaller. It means the size of your audience shrinks dramatically. It means that your companies have less say in world affairs. It means that there are fewer politicians who go. It means that countries are going to listen to India a whole lot more than they might listen to you in the next 50 years. It's not even a short-term thing. I'm talking about half a century from now. It's a scary prospect to certain countries. It's scary because the world is divided between the West, the global South, the North, the South, the West, the East, and if those binaries evaporate, it's dangerous for the existing world order. So I think this disruption in the world order. So it's the disruption in the world order, all boiling down to religious reports, human rights reports,
Correct.
press freedom index.
Yeah.
This all comes from a space of great sense of alarm at having to face the prospect of losing your seat at the table.
Correct. I completely agree with you on that. So now the other aspect of news, which I think you're coming in for a lot of praise, but also some flack at the moment with our soldiers killed in action in Jammu and Kashmir, is when a soldier dies for the country, there is sorrow, but there is also this aspect of we are all now witness to the families. And sometimes I think overwhelmingly, I personally feel that I need to share my pain. I cannot live a normal day. I have to pause a while. So I completely welcome that coverage. I read your books so that I can have that moment of reflection and gratitude. But then there are others who will perceive that as milking an occasion. It's being insensitive to intrude. And then there's the other one where, where you choose not to platform certain things. So what is your criteria with which you decide that this I will not give a platform on my channel, and this, even though might be perceived by some as exploitation, is justified?
So let's just, you've taken the example of the current Anantnag operations, the funerals, the families. So let's take that and I'll make a larger point as well. Now, look, like most criticisms of journalism, things can always be done better. Okay, a certain an underlying element of all TV journalism is having to invade a space. Okay, let me be very frank and honest with you, and remember that what I bring to the table as far as this particular topic is concerned is not only being a defense journalist for 20 years, but I've written 3 books, like you said, where a large part of my experience has been dealing with families, those who've suffered loss. I've covered more military funerals than I would have liked, and therefore I can tell you that this is these situations are crafted for the possibility of appearing insensitive, because at the end of the day these are grieving families. But let me try and defend it a little bit, because these are journalists who are doing their job. First of all, two points I'll make. A, these heroes are not just family members of those people. Okay, they're not just family members of their mothers, fathers, wives, children. And I have not met a single family, in all my years, at any funeral, before or after, who has had a problem with the media coverage. And I'll tell you why. They have never said that they've been disturbed. They have never ever said that someone has come in. That manipulation exists in your mind, because I think it comes from it stems from a viewer's impulse to alleviate themselves from the sense of guilt and pain over what they're watching. And therefore, let's target the journalists. Once again, let's target the journalists, because they are the soft target. They're the ones holding the mics. It's so easy to target that journalist. Journalist is there to give a platform to a person who has lost their family member, and a person who is no longer just a private citizen, but a person who's become a national symbol. I will counter question you and ask you, what do you think happens when the media moves away? People will say, "Arey, you've just forgotten the story and moved on? You're not going to tell the full story?" So, while submitting and accepting that things can always be done more sensitively, once again, I will say that my journalists, my colleagues, are always usually very, very sensitive. And we sometimes try and enforce a policy of not going into people's houses when these things happen. But there are all sorts of pulls and pressures that take place. So let's not deny them. But I'm saying that these families, in their grief, even in their grief, they know for a fact that being able to express themselves, being able to say things on camera which are going out to the entire country, it means something. It adds a permanence to their grief. It adds a permanence to, to a sense of loss. Now, you can turn around and say, but it's still manipulation because you're going to them and poking a mic into their faces while they're grieving. So they don't have the agency or the time or the mental space to chase out journalists. So you're actually taking advantage of that vulnerability to go into their space. But what is the journalist actually doing there? A journalist is capturing an incredibly personal moment, that is no longer personal. It is no longer personal. Look at the huge crowds there. Those huge crowds there are not there for entertainment. Those huge crowds are there not for tamasha and waving the flags. They're there because they believe that their presence means something. They also want to see it. You can say voyeurism, whatever you want. But I'm saying that even in a cynical sort of way, if I can say that, the media's brief attention on these families is hugely valuable because the media will move on. I said it on my show yesterday. I said next week you will forget the names of Manpreet and Ashish and Humayun. Nobody will remember them. Right here at the Pondicherry Lit Fest, you've got their pictures outside. I mentioned it as well. But maybe a month from now, you will have to pause for a moment to remember their names. You won't remember their names. You most certainly won't remember what their parents look like. So if journalists, for that brief 1, 2, 3 days where the national attention, the national emotion and sentiment is about feeling pain, a unified sense of pain for the loss of these men, means also telling the country what their parents think, what their wives and children think. I think that is a far bigger thing than nitpicking over any sense of manipulation. And I will be the first to say that TV journalism in many situations tends to be manipulative in terms of trying to get the subject into a situation where they can tell their story. There is a sense of voyeurism. It's a visual medium, for God's sake. It's a visual medium. It is voyeuristic by its very nature. But to ignore the larger point of it, to ignore the fact that someone who's going to be forgotten by the entire country in the next 1 or 2 weeks is getting 2-3 minutes to speak their minds about something that means more to them than anything else in the world, I think far outweighs, outclasses, outsizes these little problems that we have with manipulation.
So why did you choose not to cover when a rabid secessionist was finally arrested, Khalistani, and you said, no, he's not going to get my platform. I forget, he's become so insignificant, this Brindanwale's poor brother, you chose not to platform when he was arrested, when he was saying what he had to. Why did you choose? Like, why didn't we see what he had to say on his arrest?
No, so I'll tell you. I think that sometimes I take editorial calls. We covered it on the channel, but on my show I decided not to because I thought that, and you're talking about Amritpal. So, yeah, so there was a sense in me, even though that had become a big media story, that this guy is benefiting and reveling in this attention and making him bigger than he actually is. He's an insignificant idiot YouTuber with an outsized sense of self, and the media was whipping up a frenzy over him because the Khalistani issue had become an emotive topic because of what is happening in Canada and elsewhere, and therefore my sense was that this guy was being given attention because ye ek bani banai story thi. This guy was, he was like this young guy saying inflammatory things. So, it's the perfect thing for the media to pounce on because it's an uncomplicated story. I mean, here he is, he's doing all these things and one doesn't need to get into it. But I did a little bit of digging and I found this guy is like a nobody. He's just some random guy, found himself in the right place at the right time, clearly very ambitious, has very little following apart from, a few social media armies on YouTube, etc. And some on the ground. Let's not diminish it completely. And I thought we're making this guy out to be another Bhindrawale. There were some channels which were calling him Bhindrawale 2.0, etc. Which is anyone with any sense of history knows that that was almost cartoonish. The Bhindrawale issue, anyone who used the phrase Bhindrawale issue, was probably not born at that time. I was too small as well, but I have the ability to at least read, so I was able to. I do know a great deal about what happened at that time through the eyes of other journalists. It was not only idiotic, but it was also dangerous, right? To give Amritpal greater importance than he A deserved and B most definitely commanded was, in my view, lying to your audience. You're making him out to be a villain he was a cartoon character on a YouTube show. He was not a villain. He's now languishing in some jail because obviously, like most idiots of Amritpal's kind, they tend to have an outsized view of themselves, and then there's overreach. And then you realize, oh my God, I can't do this. Now I'm in trouble. So he's in trouble now, and the law should and must take its own course. But that was where those decisions stemmed from.
So just to conclude, it's I wanted to combine both. Then like what drives you to be the journalist that you are, and second, also combine like you. I listen to your takes. In fact, I don't watch television, but I from a journalistic perspective, I listen to Rahul Shiv Shankar. I listen to you, and from analyst perspective, I listen to Anand Ranganathan. There is something that that is common between the three of you, and that is integrity and rationality. So that's what I like about the three of you. So I just want you to comment on why you do what you do. It's very visible that you're passionate about your work. And second is that, this capacity, how is it cultivated? Is it natural that even when we expect nothing but distilled information, albeit with opinion, it's fine. But it's very difficult to say that your takes are Shiv's personal opinion, because there is a certain universality. Any rational person would see a universality in your take, even though it's personal. So how have you cultivated that?
Okay, so like I said, I'm in real life a very opinionated person. I am a very opinionated person, but I think one of the things that really drives me as a journalist is, a great deal of curiosity. I think people have stopped being curious in this world anymore. They're used to, just getting prefabricated opinions and the way news is delivered. What drives me is that I like finding out about things that interest me, and then I infuse my stories with those things. I like talking about the things that I'm curious about as well, because I feel if audiences have latched on to me, and I'm very lucky to have those audiences, I believe that they want to know about the same things that I want to know about. So many of my takes will be about answering questions that they've asked me, and I will say, I want to find out as well. I'll give you a very small example. During the Anantnag coverage, I got a whole bunch of questions from people saying, what would be happening inside that army unit now? Will they take revenge? What about Badla? How can they sit quiet when their commanding officer has been killed? And I realized that in all my 20 years as a defense correspondent, I couldn't, with facts and credibility answer that question. I could give them a vague sort of answer, but I couldn't. So I put on my journalist hat for 2 hours before my show. I called up 5 or 6 friends of mine from the army who've been battalion commanders, who've been commanders in the Rashtriya Rifles. And I said, what happens inside a unit when a commanding officer is killed? Because these are not robots, these are humans. So tell me what goes on. And I took all that information, I distilled it down and answered a question. A very emotive issue. You're talking about a commanding officer being killed. What are the emotions inside?
But you covered that in your opening chapter in your Galwan.
I did as well. The thing is, the funny part of it is that for that video, I also got feedback saying, oh, what do you mean by morale is low? morale is always high, etc., etc. I said, look, you can try and alleviate your sense of guilt about how soldiers also feel human emotions and say, they are rock stars no matter what. Or you can be a little realistic and differentiate between morale and professionalism. Nobody for a moment is saying that a unit is going to be have downtime because they feel a sense of grief and feel a sense of loss. There's no question about it. These are soldiers who are on the front foot, ready for operations 24 hours a day. Who says they can't feel grief while they are in operations, or anger or resentment or whatever it is? But I'm saying, don't look at them as robots. They are not robots. Morale is it. Morale will be in the pits when if your father is killed in front of you. Will you be? Is it possible that you can be ready to fight and grieving at the same time? Of course, you will be. Right? It's the same with the army, and the army are soldiers. And a large part of the work I've done with my books and my show is to try and humanize these things, because many of the opinions that we have about the armed forces, many of the opinions we have about things are a reflection of how we feel on and what we are. It's to alleviate our sense of guilt. The words we use for soldiers, etc. These are to alleviate our sense of guilt about having to send people out into harmful situations while we enjoy our normal everyday life. So what drives me is curiosity. What drives me is hunger to get into the blood vessels of stories, understand them from perspectives that are beyond just my own personal biases, and I feel a great sense of satisfaction and joy in not being alone in this journey. Especially with the my takes, with the takes, and but in general with my show and my channel, the sense of belonging to an audience is it cannot be described in words. It's a beautiful feeling, having thousands, hopefully millions of people who are sort of with you in everything that you're doing, with you saying, listen, why don't you do this? We want to know about this. But and I keep thinking in my mind that if they want to know about this, they can go and Google it, but they want it from me, which means they want me to tell them the story. So every journalist should also be a storyteller. You have to be a storyteller. And as long as it is moored in facts and data and verifiable information, I think that's the way it should go forward.
So what can I say, Shiv? Continue to remain curious, continue to remain hungry, and continue to express with the articulation you have, which is pretty rare. And thank you so much for this. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time now, and finally I have most of the answers that I wanted. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.